So 1. Sorry. So it starts in C, but during this jump, right? Up to the G, suddenly you get an F sharp. We modulate, which means our real answer is going to get really cuckoo crazy. Okay? So then our real answer, if we were to have an exact replica of this, just moved up a perfect fifth, it would be this guy. So this is the real answer. All right? And you're going to hear how crazy it's going to sound. So basically, we started on C. All right? So everything gets moved up a fifth. And it goes. All right? And we end up in D minor, right? So we start in G minor, which is a closely related key to C minor, right? G minor, C minor. But we're going to end up in D minor, which is nuts. That's not anywhere near here. All right? In fact, it's like way, way off. So it's one more over. So it's too far. F minor's over here. So that's 2 steps, which is too many, from C minor. All right? So what happens, we want to keep it in this window right here. So what Bach does is change the ending. So this becomes a tonal answer. You'll hear what he does. So the beginning is the same as our real answer. And then here's where it goes different. Up to A flat. Now he goes down. All right? So instead of going to F minor, we go right back. So we start in C minor with our fugue subject, and then we travel to G minor, right? And then in our answer, we start back in G minor, so we're already in G minor, and then we travel back to C minor, right? So basically what happens is we go from 1 to 5, and then in our tonal answer, we're at 5, and then we end back in C minor on 1, right? So this is what we mean by the tonic-dominant relationship. Here, what we end up doing is we start 1, we go to 5, we pick it up here in the answer on 5, right? But instead of going to 5, we end up in D minor, which in the key of C minor is a 2. So that's not going to help the tonic-dominant relationship. All right? So Bach fixes that by doing one thing, which is transposing this whole section right here, rather than having this part go up a third, right? So go from G to B flat, up a minor third. Instead, he goes up a minor second and pushes all of this down one whole step, all right? Then we end up back in 1. Otherwise, it transposes exactly, all right? So this is all it is. So you have your subject, and then you have your answer, all right? Now, while that answer is happening in one voice, right? So say our alto voice starts with our subject, and then the soprano voice takes it over, right? The same motive, same melody, but it just moved up a fifth with either a tonal or real answer. And so the alto voice then, while the soprano is singing, comes up with a counter subject, all right? So this is like the second half of the melody, right? Or it's just like a second melody that happens, right? right after the subject. So it goes subject, counter subject, and as that counter subject happens, it's being overlapped with the subject. All right? And you'll see this played out in the fugue that we take a look at today. So because a counter subject might be used both above and below an answer, and this is in the case that you've got maybe a soprano, you've got three parts going at once. So one person has the subject. So you'd have like the soprano is singing the subject, and then the alto is singing a counter subject, and the tenor has also the counter subject, right? So you've got subject, counter subject, right? Just like that. So they can both have the counter subject going, and then maybe the alto, the soprano passes the subject to the alto, which is the answer, right? And then what happens here is that the soprano has to sing the counter subject, and the tenor has to sing the counter subject, all right? And then maybe the alto passes this off to the tenor, so now he's got the subject again. It's not the answer, because it's the second time it's come around. Subject or answer, and then you've got counter subject up here, all right? Just be aware. So, because a counter subject might be used both above and below an answer, composers of the period constructed counter subjects that are invertible. So you can invert them. These invertible counter subjects were derived to avoid any unstylistic dissonances that can occur when a counter subject appears in a different voice. In inversion at the octave, all harmonic perfect fifths require special treatment because when inverted, the perfect fifth becomes a perfect fourth. So, which is considered a dissonance in this style. Still. To find out if a counter subject is invertible, play the first entrance of the answer of the counter subject, but place the upper voice an octave or two lower, right? If the perfect fourths produced by the inversion are properly treated as dissonances, then the counter subject is invertible. So example 3.3 shows an example of a counter subject that is invertible counterpoint, okay? So here's your counter subject right here, all right? So ba da 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 dee da da dee da da dee da 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 da. You can see the subject is going at the same time. So probably what just happened actually is that the soprano had the subject and then moved on to the counter subject. So she had this part. So you take this chunk, move it up here, copy paste, put it up here, all right? And then the soprano keeps singing the counter subject while the alto comes in with that subject again, which would technically be known as the answer because it's not the first time you're hearing it, okay? So here you can see that you can flip it, right? So you can have the soprano singing the subject, as opposed to the bass, right? So you can take that, pop it down here, and it works. Now, when we get further into this, you'll also see that they'll be totally flipped and reversed, right? So you'll see yeah, so it'll be going up and then down. So it'll do the exact opposite. So anyway, don't worry about that quite yet. Just know that in this instance right now, if it's invertible, it means that can be put into any voice and not cause any unsavory perfect fourths. Okay? All right, so sometimes a fugue subject ends on a pitch that does not connect conveniently to the counter subject. All right? So to make the junction smooth, composers add some extra notes known as a link. So these are common. Basically, if they can't get it to fit perfectly, they'll add in some extra stuff to make it work. Links are short, occasionally only a few notes. Not all fugues contain a link. Not all of them will, but sometimes they will, and usually it's only a couple notes. All right, so you have the subject, and then there will be a little link, and the counter subject will come up with the answer. All right, so just be aware of that. The other thing you'll find is something called a bridge. It's kind of a bridge in the same sense that we use it in pop music. So it's a short passage at the end of the first entrance of the answer. All right? So the end of the first, so you get your subject and your answer and counter subject, and then you'll get a little bridge, right? Which is just taking material from the subject and the counter subject. And sometimes what will happen is you'll get, they'll take snippets of it, like 3 notes, and they'll sort of modulate into the new subject and counter subject. Or you'll get, oftentimes you'll find little sequences that happen in the bridge. But basically it's for the purposes of modulation. So its purpose is to modulate back to the tonic key. All right, so you don't want to, again, stray too far away from your family of keys. And yeah, so back to the tonic key from the answer, which is in the dominant. So it's basically a way to get back to the tonic from dominant. All right? Not all fugues will include a bridge, but if you see one, that's what it is. All right, just a little more. So although the design of the exposition differs from fugue to fugue, one simple pattern is shown here. All right? So lots of times you'll get, so the soprano will have the subject, right? Start, and there will be nothing. There will be rest here. Nothing happens. Then the alto joins in once that subject is done with an answer. The soprano keeps going with the counter subject, right? Then, once the alto is done with the answer, the tenor comes in with the subject, right? And the alto will keep going with that counter subject. Meanwhile, the soprano will have basically free material, filler material, whatever is needed to make these work harmonically, okay? And since the subject's already been answered, the second time it's introduced, it's called subject again, all right? And then, once they're done with their subject, the bass will come in with the answer, and the tenor will continue with its counter subject. And this will be free material. And then what will happen is the bass will have the counter subject, all right? And it'll be free material for everybody, or one of the other voices will come back in with the subject again, right? So counter subject, and then maybe the soprano will get the subject again, all right? Or the alto, or anything. Now, keep in mind, it does not have to be in this order. It can be any order, all right? And you may have, depending on, so the subject is always going to be in a tonic. The answer is going to always be in some sort of dominant, all right? So in this case, subject is tonic, answer is dominant. Now, sometimes what can happen is you'll get subject and then the answer in the dominant, and then when it comes back again, it will still be in the dominant, which means we'll call it the answer, and the subject will come back to tonic, and then that will be the subject. So it could go potentially subject, answer, answer, subject, rather than subject, answer, subject, answer. All right? So it could be 1, 5, 5, 1, or it could go 1, 5, 1, 5. Just depending on partially how the subject works out, how easy it is to get back to tonic, stuff like that. So, voices can be introduced in almost any order, all right? So it doesn't have to be soprano, alto, tenor, bass. It could go tenor, soprano, bass, alto. It could go bass, soprano, tenor, alto. It could be any combination.